Okay, hi guys. Luke Johnson here, founder of Shredded by Science. We've got Eric Helms today doing our Q&A, and I've also got my fellow coach here. So, Ali, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, I'm Ali, one of the 3 Shredded by Science coaches, and I also do stuff as well as SBS. But here now with you guys.
Amazing. And the main man himself.
Eric Helms. So I guess I've been involved in strength sport and natural bodybuilding for about a decade now. I've been a trainer for a long time and a competitor, and probably fell in love with the science just as much as I did the practice of the sport and coaching others. So background for me a little bit, I've done a couple of master's degrees, both looking at exercise science and nutrition, specifically related to relevant topics to strength and physique athletes, and now I'm doing my PhD on autoregulation and strength sport, and I've coached probably 200 plus athletes to the stage and the platform, and I've done okay for myself as well, and most importantly, I'm trying to bring an evidence-based approach to natural bodybuilders, grow and support the sport, and help people find balance. And that's kind of what 3D Muscle Journey's message is for kind of the overall industry.
Excellent. Right, we'll get straight down to business, and I'll start off with the first question, then over to Ali. So Eric, when taking on a new client, what information do you like to collect before you design the start of their prep?
Cool. Good question. I'll basically kind of walk you through the way I start somebody up, or that we start somebody up at 3D Muscle Journey. First step is we normally get an inquiry, and then we give them the relevant information about our coaching so they can make the right decision if we're for them. And then they go to an application that includes a lot of information, competition dates, what their goals are, and also what their expectations are. In addition to some of the more quantitative data like height, weight, age, gender, pictures of them currently, pictures of them at their last contest if they had one, and their body weight at their last contest, and then of course their current training, current nutrition, current supplementation, current cardio. And that's kind of step one. After that, we review the application, contact them, and have a discussion with them about basically who we are, what we do, and answer any questions they might have, so we can kind of build some rapport, get on the same page. And then from that point, we assign them a start date. We typically have, when we are taking clients, we typically have a 1 to 3 week period where it's going to be before we have a spot opening and a coach can take them on. And this is a great way to give someone interim instructions so that they can get a feel for what we do, and we can get some data. I think the most important thing when you're giving someone a workout plan and a nutrition plan is that you can see how they respond to kind of your shooting from the hip initial ideas on what they should be doing. Typically, if I work with someone for 24 weeks, what they start on and what they finish on is very different because it's getting more and more customized to them. So being able to have 2 or 3 weeks of that initially is a great way to kind of kickstart that process, hit the ground running. They know the reporting process and what I need to do my job effectively, and we can build a good relationship.
Excellent. So a good thorough process. And again, as you said, most people, when you ask them the questions about roughly what their maintenance is, again, it's like they don't track, so using that time to just get that information before you start is a really good idea. And I've sort of incorporated that as well. I've taken that from you and just, okay, I'm like a weekly period just to get as much data as possible.
That's right. Even if you can just see what body weight are they maintaining at what calorie intake, you have so much more information than if you just went off some calculator.
Mm-hmm. So. Excellent. Ali, next question.
Cool. So we had a few questions about training to failure. So what are your thoughts on the matter, and how frequently would you get your athletes to do so?
That's a good question. I think to start, there's a bit of a misunderstanding that training to failure is a thing. Like this is sets, reps, and are you going to failure? And I think there's a lot more context involved to what training to failure is, why one might want to do it, what the purpose is, and what some of the potential downsides are. Basically, if you take an extended set all the way to failure, you're making sure that you recruit and train all of the muscle fibers involved in that movement, which definitely seems like a good thing. However, if we have to remember kind of what the big picture of how we create hypertrophy and overload and growth over time. And yes, there are metabolic factors, metabolic fatigue factors related to growth. There's a little bit of muscle damage possibly related to growth. But the main thing that starts all of those is the actual movement. So the actual tension stimulus over time. So that is actually lifting the weights. So if you're not lifting the weights in the first place, you're not going to have a fatigue stimulus, you're not going to create any muscle damage, and the quantity of the total work you do, so total volume, is always going to be the big preceding factor. So if you're training to failure to increase your metabolic fatigue, and in a way reducing your overall volume, you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And to give you an example of what that might be like, you start off a leg day and you take your first set of 8 on squats to complete failure. Your next set, you're either going to have to reduce your load or reduce the number of reps, and probably all subsequent sets in that exercise, if not that whole workout, are going to be either lower load and lower reps, so a lot less volume. And if that happens, then you're also going to be just looking at a total decrease in the amount of work you do over the course of a week, over the course of a mesocycle, over the course of a macrocycle, and potentially you're working harder but not smarter, if that makes sense. So the practical response of how do I then use failure, if it's the last movement on a body part in the last set, no reason you could hit failure for sure. Plus, there's a big difference between hitting failure on a bicep curl and something like a deadlift. One is going to incur a lot more systemic fatigue, and it's not like you can't recover from a set of 15 bicep curls by the next day. And you're going to be hitting failure for different reasons, in different rep ranges. So high reps isolation movements towards the end of the set you're going to do for that body part, no big deal. But in general, what I tell my guys to do and gals to do is follow the progression plan that we have in place, and there's always a progression plan in place. And if you were required to hit failure to follow it, that's fine. It's just kind of basically prioritizing your variables. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so don't shoot your load straight off the bat.
Cool.
Cool. Excellent. That's really good.
Exactly.
Answer.
Right.
Sorry, I had to say it was on my mind as soon as you said it. Right, next question.
Well, and that's also the way you have a good sex life. So, yeah.
Exactly. We've got to get it in there. Alan would be in his element at the moment if Alan was in his hangout.
Yes, he would.
Okay, next question. We'll move on. Get away from the sex jokes. This is from our friend James Layton. He'd like to know how you'd structure deloading phases into your plans, and would you use them differently based on if they was on a hypertrophy phase or a cutting phase?
Okay, so a gaining or a leaning out phase. First, hey James, what's going on, man? Secondly, I would say just like failure, I think we need to get away from the idea that deloads are a thing. The fact that the deloads are a new concept to bodybuilders, I always find a little bit funny, and I almost wish we used a different word, because planned easier weeks or planned light weeks have been an integral part of periodization since the dawn of sports science and since we started training. It's very intuitive and something that isn't even a topic of discussion among strength coaches, that, yeah, you plan in easy weeks so that you can have more productive hard weeks recovering, and you can, basically have a more productive overall plan. But there is almost this kind of visceral fear to not killing yourself every time you step in the gym in kind of the traditional bodybuilding mindset, and that's something that I was victim to for probably a solid 2 years. So yeah, a deload isn't magic, it isn't anything special, it's just a planned lighter week or easier week so that your planned heavier or harder weeks are more effective, and allowing you to recover and see your progress. And likewise, I also think we need to get away from the idea that a surplus and a deficit are these two drastically different things. The reality is that when we're eating, we're in a surplus and in the postprandial period. And when we are not eating, or when we've been asleep for a while, we're in a deficit. A cut and a bulk are physiologically the same thing, just at different magnitudes. And the change in our body composition over time is what results in the things we associate with what it feels like to be on a cut or a bulk. You know, when you've been in a net state of losing weight and losing body fat, eventually that thermostat kind of shifts towards, hold on, we're losing body size, we're getting below our set point, and the opposite of true is when you're in a bulk. But, you know, we are always in a fluctuating state of surplus and deficit, and it doesn't necessarily change the rules of the game when we're training, or the way we periodize training. So in whatever way is applicable to the individual situation, I do think there should be programmed in light weeks to accommodate the goals and allow recovery. And if anything, when you've been in a sustained calorie deficit, if we want to call that a thing, for a period, you may need more of those, or a different schedule or a different approach. But they should be intentional, and they should be programmed in. They don't necessarily need to be regularly no matter what, although I often do that with young, overzealous bodybuilders because they aren't as honest with themselves as they would like to be.
Cool. Excellent. Ali?
Next question. When looking to develop certain body parts, how would you structure the training to ensure those lagging body parts are developed? Would you increase in training frequency per week or more sets during a given workout?
That's a good question. So there are a number of ways that you can specialize in a body part, and a number of ones that are go-to for me. Really interestingly enough, frequency is just a way of increasing volume. If you think about it, if you are training all your muscle groups once per week and you're looking at weekly volume, if you train them all twice per week with the same amount of sets and loads and all that, you're going to basically be doubling your volume, right? So increasing frequency is a way of increasing volume. It's just a way of organizing it in a different way. So you can increase frequency as a way of increasing volume. You can just simply increase your volume on one day, and either one of those or both can be an effective strategy. You can do too much volume on one day to where it's not as effective as spreading it out. There's a lot of studies, I mean not a lot, there's been 4 or 5, 6 studies where they've taken equated volume with different frequencies, where they've gone, you know, let's take some powerlifters who train normally 3 days a week, split those training sessions in half and do 6, and you start to see improvements in strength and improvements in body composition, just because the more you do in one session, the quality degrades. I mean, if you think about the kind of focus you have on your 10th set versus your first, they're a little different. So yeah, I would say step one, you don't want to absolutely murder a body part on a single day. You can definitely do more volume relative to your other body parts, and you can start increasing the frequency. Another option is simply, just because we talked about how quality degrades as you've done a long workout. If you've got these really long workouts and your weak point is at the end, you can simply move it up early in the priority list. This also depends on the body part. Like if you really want to prioritize your hamstrings on leg day, I wouldn't necessarily want to do a bunch of hamstring curls to failure and then squat, because you could negatively affect your motor pattern on squat, drop your kind of load there. But if it's like biceps, there's nothing wrong with putting biceps at the beginning of a leg day. It's not really going to negatively affect anything. It's just a way to get some more volume. Another thing I like to do that I play with is I actually bring the volume on a lot of the other body parts down a little bit. You know, we are I wouldn't say a closed system, but we use the same energy and the same adaptive reserve to make growth in all body parts. So if we are trying to push hard on our entire body, perhaps we're not going to have the same adaptive capabilities if we were focusing on one and kind of putting the rest on quote-unquote maintenance. Like for example, right now I'm dealing with a hip injury and I can't consistently squat the way I want to. However, my bench is going up. Maybe that's because I am just focusing on it more and trying to stay positive and kind of see the silver lining, or perhaps it's that in combination with the fact that I have more to adapt and give to that adaptation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I found the same thing happened with me recently with grip strength when I injured my foot. Went up quickly, which I hadn't expected.
Yeah.
Grip strength of all things.
So if I want to get a better deadlift, just break my foot.
Break your foot. It'll work. I actually watched a video today. Someone's deadlifting, and as they're like pulling like a strongman event, and he's actually chucking up every time he's repping, like projectile vomiting. I don't think that's going to help in terms of your energy levels.
Well, only way to train. It's like the opposite of intra-workout nutrition.
That's it.
You actually you're giving nutrition back. It's a new method of cutting.
Extra. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wicked. No, that's a really good answer, and I think that's going to basically help a lot of people with that, because they always get to the more is the best option, even if and they're in the gym like 2 hours and just smashing the crap out of a body part. And as you said, going back to the failure thing, they just go to, because they want to try and obviously develop it, they just think, I've got to go to failure all the time, rather than being a little bit smart and programming in, maybe hitting it 3-4 times a week, and just doing it that way. Cool. Right, moving on. When someone transitions from their bulking phase to their cut, how would you adapt their training? So if we can look at both cardio and weight training.
So on the weight training side of things, I think I touched on this a little bit, that a bulk and a cut aren't really drastically different as far as your body's concerned. It takes kind of unless you're doing something really crazy off the gun, which I wouldn't suggest, that your body's going to kind of shift into a different state over time. But I typically, so here's the thing. In an ideal world, we would love to be able to actually increase volume as we went into a bodybuilding, prep, actually grow into the show. But the reality is that almost without exception, you're not going to be able to sustain the same kind of workload in some way, whether it's volume, load, or just the mental energy that you have to train, or physical energy that when you cut. So typically, what I try to do with people is we slowly will work up their total volume and workload in the off season, and then it will come down more in a reactive way than a proactive way, meaning that I don't just start cutting volume right when they start the diet, but rather if they're not recovering as well, or if they're just feeling really beat up, I might pull a set away from a compound movement, and typically you get almost a non-proportionate increase in recovery. Like they're doing 5 sets of squats, 2 days a week, and I pull it down to 4, and all of a sudden they feel like the light turn on again, just because they're that beat up. And little things kind of get big payoff, and all of a sudden the progressions start working again. But no, I don't just go, oh right, 2/3 your normal volume, we started a diet. Clearly you can't train anymore and you're an invalid. No, it's more of a reactionary thing, and hopefully the contest prep you had 4 years ago has less volume than the contest prep you have 4 years later, if you're slowly kind of bringing up your volume over time and you're advancing your training age, and in the off season you're just going to kind of see this steady rise over time, like your 10-year training career and your volume's going up. There's going to be these dips every time you diet, just as a matter of surviving the diet. But we're not necessarily intentionally decreasing volume into prep. It's more of just kind of, shit happens. Prep isn't ideal. You're basically starving yourself to a certain degree. So. Oh, and in terms of cardio, sorry. So for cardio, it's an interesting kind of paradigm that in the off season and during prep, you want to get away with the minimal amount of cardio that you can get away with. For some people, that means no cardio. For most people, that means a decent amount of cardio. And the purpose in the off season and the purpose in season are slightly different. Off season, it's to stay in good enough condition. I don't even necessarily mean conditioning or your body composition, but in good enough shape to be able to train effectively. Like if I asked you to do a 15 rep set on squats, if your lungs give out before your legs, then we probably need to work on your cardiovascular endurance. And sometimes a more efficient route to get there is direct cardio training rather than just waiting until you adapt to the high volume weight training. And then during prep, it's to find that right balance between energy expenditure and energy intake, knowing that your energy expenditure is going to go down while you've been dieting. And then trying to balance the fact that we don't want the adaptations that come from a lot of cardiovascular training, and trying to find the right balance between some kind of high intensity cardio that mimics what we do in the weight room, and then just increasing caloric expenditure without turning into an endurance athlete. So I really don't lean much on cardio. I try to get away with a little amount as I can. It's not uncommon for the average person who I might diet down for a show to only be doing, say, 4 sessions per week. But sometimes they're doing every day. Just depends on the person.
Cool. How would you schedule it, Eric? Would you tend to do it on their rest days, or based on the person and their time availability, maybe like in the morning, and then if they train in the evening?
Yeah. Yeah, it's mainly I give a lot of flexibility to the cardio training. If I like to give a lot of like barbell complexes to people, really light weights. You know, the whole reason we started up with HIIT and doing like sprints and that type of thing is because we saw that was an improvement over doing like endurance training, and you know, some of those quote unquote interference issues when you do a lot of endurance training in a strength athlete. So right, we'll have them be more like sprinters. We'll sprint and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's problems with sprinting as well. You get, you know, something twice the number of hamstring injuries in sprinters compared to long distance runners, which is crazy because long distance runners put in way more mileage than sprinters. And that's sprinters who know how to sprint, not bodybuilders pretending they know how to sprint. So I would imagine that bodybuilders sprinting are going to have even a greater instance of hamstring injuries, and in fact, they do. If you were to well, that's my anecdotal opinion. Most times I hear somebody who did sprints during their prep, we're talking to be 50-50 chance that they got a strained hammy at some point. So yeah, I like barbell complexes. We use movement patterns and form, you know. It's a lot more fun. It's something you love to do anyways, and it's an easy way of burning calories, and it's using the same muscle groups, the same range of motion. Might even enhance your recovery. You just have to not let it turn into a true weight training session. You know, I'm talking, I grab a training bar, so a 5-kilo bar, and I slap 10s on there, and I do Olympic lifting and compound movement. You know, little 30 to 60 second bursts, and then I rest, you know, 2-to-1 ratio if I'm in good enough shape at the time, and do that for 30 minutes. So anyway, the high intensity training needs to be done in a way that minimizes impact, minimizes the risk of, you know, hamstring strain. It's fun, enjoyable, and then you don't want to do that obviously immediately before you train. That's the main rule I have, is don't do high intensity work before you have to do your high intensity work, your resistance training, which is obviously the most important thing for a bodybuilder. And then in terms of just, you can't give endless amount of high intensity work because it's high intensity. So, you know, a little bit of that, sprinkle it in, get what you can, so long as it doesn't negatively impinge on weight training. And then if you need more, you need to basically find just energy expenditure, or like your low intensity cardio that is more like just really upping your NEAT, if you will. And you know, whether that's going on a walk with your wife, you know, going on a hike, taking the stairs intentionally, but sometimes I'll just give somebody a target calorie burn of LISS and just tell them, hey, just don't let it turn into, you know, running a marathon, because I'm not worried if someone has to go walk their dog. That's not going to, you know, their hamstrings aren't going to fall off and the muscle won't disappear and then they go catabolic, you know. So
nice. We're going to see everyone doing their barbell complexes now in the gym, which is good.
Yeah, they probably do too much, too heavy, and too frequently, and then get mad at me. But you know,
yeah, Eric Helms.
Such is the way of the internet.
Yeah, low weight people. You're not lifting. Leave your lifting to the actual weight training session. Right, Ali, you're up next, sir.
Yep. When looking at a refeed, do you like to use one large refeed per week or smaller multiple days in a row? And do you see a benefit of using one over the other?
That's a good question, and I think, like everyone, I'm influenced by my experiences and kind of what I've seen. I've experimented with on myself doing 2 moderate-sized refeeds and doing that with folks, and I've talked to like Joe Klinzewski about this, Lane Norton, and just a lot of other coaches, and I've experimented with 2 a week, 1 a week, all this kind of stuff. I think the main benefits of refeeds aren't hard, quantitative, physiological, especially when someone's at the beginning of prep. They can improve performance. They can really improve behavior and mood, and they definitely can, in some people at certain points, improve the outcome of the diet in terms of just getting leaner in a reasonable time course, and you know, making sure it's mostly body fat. But I don't think there's hard rules on it. I personally like to start with about a once per week refeed that's total calories close to their maintenance. and a lot of carbs, but not necessarily dropping protein or fat to increase the carbs, just using whatever difference between their maintenance and their low days to get the calories up. So increasing calories up to maintenance through predominantly increasing carbohydrate, keeping protein and fat similar to the low days, and then as they get leaner and as they move through the diet, if I think that they do better off of a different refeed schedule, we modify that. Most simply, sometimes it'll become every 6 days, or every 5 days, or every 4 days instead of once a week. And sometimes the person just really kind of tanks in energy level and motivation midweek in the process of doing what we need to do to get shredded. But I don't want to set them back. And as I mentioned before with the reducing volume, sometimes small changes can make a big difference. Anyone who's dieted down, it's amazing what an extra 15 grams of carbs will do, and even in the course of a day. You would think that going from 150 grams of carbs to 165 wouldn't make a difference, but you ask any competitor who's had to go that low, and they'll be like, yeah, that makes a huge difference. So sometimes just having a little midweek bump by 25, 30, even 50 grams of carbs, you can get a non-proportionate increase in performance, mood, or the ability to sustain the diet. And I wouldn't necessarily call that a refeed, but sometimes I will do like a one per week big maintenance bump, and then say a little pick-me-up midweek where I just bump their carbs up by, say, 30 to 50 grams or something like that.
Cool. It just helps with their morale. Keeps them going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Ali, I think you've got the next one as well.
Yeah. Is there anything you've changed your stance on recently about any topic? And if so, how is that reflected in your practice?
Yeah, I already touched on the barbell complexes thing. That's more of just me kind of talking to other guys in the field, thinking about it, reflecting, thinking about what do I enjoy doing. In 2009 during my prep, I started doing basically like CrossFit for my cardio, and not crazy heavy or anything like that. But I flip some tires, fling around some kettlebells. I'd quantify it in some way and make it regular. But I just started to keep the same. Let's say, I had a ratio of 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off that I was doing for my HIIT at the time. And I was like, well, why am I doing it on the elliptical or sprinting or any of this stuff? Like, I can do anything. I think I even one time did burpees for 15 seconds and then just took a walk afterwards. So there's a lot of ways you can do it, and that just got me thinking. And then from talking to other people and thinking about it, and then finding out that other people are trying and similar things with success. Like I talked to Dr. Mike Zerdos, and he was like, wow, I've actually been thinking that's a really good idea as well. And other guys who were just kind of thinking, why do we start doing HIIT in the first place? It's a good first step, a movement in the right direction. But just like failure isn't a thing, deloads aren't a thing, HIIT isn't a thing. All activity has an intensity. And whether it's, sleeping, or whether it's, running from the cops while you're on PCP, you got to, which happens to me like at least once a week, So you've got this broad range of intensity, and there's so many ways and shapes and forms it could take. But it's not magic, It's not anything different than anything else, really. It's just a matter of what makes the most sense under the conditions of a bodybuilding contest prep. And so that's something I've been playing with more and more and more. Some of my clients are doing it, some aren't. And there's nothing wrong with the people who like to do more of a steady-state cardio format as well. I think sustainability is a big key to it. So I'd say one would be the barbell complexes. What else have I changed? Obviously, a lot of the work that Alan Aragon, Brad Schoenfeld, and Krieger have done around nutrient timing, I think has been really, really interesting to me, and peri-workout nutrition. I love how they have these very context-based continuum, and it's become in the industry nutrient timing is irrelevant, which is completely erroneous. But realizing that we're not endurance athletes, we don't need to replete our glycogen. Replete, is that a word? Replenish, and that we replete. Damn it. We don't need to replenish our glycogen, and that physiological levels of insulin aren't the same thing as massive spikes of it that you can inject. So maybe we don't need to try to carb load with protein for the acute anabolic period, and that our body is pretty capable of compensating for periods of not eating. and that maybe there is a period of consuming protein that is beneficial, but it's probably not just a single hour. And most importantly, which I always love because it's kind of what I do, is putting things in the proper order of priorities. There was a solid period where protein researchers were saying, more important than total intake is when you eat it. And I think everyone who had logic on their side, not necessarily the data yet, was going, that just doesn't sound right, And it just took the proper way of looking at the data and analyzing things for that paradigm to change. And lo and behold, logic held up in the end. And we know that, sure, protein timing does have some effect. And it's probably a good idea to have protein on either side of your workouts if you're, interested in maximal lean body mass gain. But it doesn't need to be immediate. And it's certainly not more important than the total intake you have for the day. And then realizing that maybe there is a place for carbohydrates around your workouts, but only if maybe you're depleting glycogen, training really, really long, or have to do a second session. And some of these things happen during prep. If you have to do, a barbell complex session on the same day you're doing an upper body workout, and they're 4 hours apart, and you're already on low carbs, and you had to train first thing in the morning for the workout, not the barbell complex session, then maybe you do have to think about the placement of your carbs. So I always like when there is an increase in context and people actually critically thinking versus just memorizing rules of their favorite guru. So and that's all inclusive of anyone who someone respects. I really hate it when people say, but Eric Helms says this, and it's like, why do you listen to me? I'm just interpreting data. So a little bit of a rant, but yeah, I'd say nutrient timing, barbell complexes. Those are probably the big two that pop up in my head, but I really strive to have a constantly updated way of thinking about things. And I know that if I'm doing exactly the same thing I did a few years ago, I'm probably doing something wrong.
Wicked. Great answers. Right, nearly there. Question from me now. How do you ensure your athletes peak at the right time? So we can look at a few weeks out, and then obviously from a few weeks out to getting them on stage. So I know everyone thinks peak week's the magic week.
Yep. So yeah, there's a couple main topics I want to talk about in this. Is first that peaking is a thing as well. That's something that must happen. It's an absolute part of prep, and that you have to sacrifice 2 goats on the 3rd lunar cycle when the tides are in and you can see Orion in the 3rd quarter of the sky, and only then will you look your best on stage, and only for 5 minutes. And that's kind of the approach, is that this magical combination of things that need to happen. Now the reality is that if you are shredded, you've maintained your muscle, you had a relatively non-invasive and incredibly not a brutal prep, you could walk in, not have a great peak week, and still look fantastic. You could walk in, have a great peak week, and maybe improve 3, 4, 5% at most. That said, if you do all of some of this voodoo stuff, you can look worse by more than 5%. So the first step to peaking is be ready beforehand. There's no such thing as peaking early. You want to make sure that you are shredded ahead of time. And then using the data that you had from those refeeds, if you had them in your diet, to get an idea of how you respond to higher food intakes. Those are some kind of big general principles. Another one is when you start to evaluate all the questions of how do we peak, like should I be cutting my water? Should I be cutting sodium and loading potassium? Should I be getting in the sauna? Should I be drinking alcohol to dehydrate? I could give you an endless list of things that competitors do. They're all based around the assumption that they need to, quote unquote, dry out. That we walk around holding more subcutaneous water than normal, and that to get to your maximal level of definition, you therefore need to reduce it. And I would first start questioning that concept at its very root. Do we walk around water bloated and just holding some strange amount of subcutaneous water all the time, and actually all of us are shredded, we just can't see it, we just need to cut water? I don't think that's the case. I can understand where it started back when there wasn't necessarily natural bodybuilding. There's just bodybuilding, and guys were taking androgenic drugs all the time and basically on massive menstrual cycles all the time, then maybe when they cut water they saw an improvement in the visual effect. But when we're talking about a natural bodybuilder either you're shredded or you're not. And yes, being really, really glycogen depleted can make you look worse. But in terms of manipulating your water, it's probably not going to be very effective. If you look at studies on dehydration, you can see that muscle water content goes down as well, in equal proportion to body water content, and that muscle is like roughly 2/3 water. So yeah, if you really dehydrate, you're going to look smaller. So we probably don't want to do that. So yeah, first question the idea of, do we need to dry out? Is that the goal? And then maybe it's just a matter of trying to get yourself to the glycogen and intramuscular triglyceride levels that you can maintain based on your current food intake at the current leanness. And a few other things I like to do is make sure that electrolytes are stayed pretty much the same, not modifying a lot of stuff. Trying to keep things, food sources roughly the same, and just not go into the final week changing everything. Because then, even if it does work, you don't know what worked, So it's about consistent tracking. But yeah, question the concept of, do we need to dry out? That's probably the big message there.
Excellent. I think you pretty much touched on the next question, which is from Ali, which was, what are some of the misconceptions? I suppose you've gone through them all.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, pretty much answered it.
Yeah, I like the water loading. The water loading.
Yeah, I guess.
When they just drink
10
litres of water,
which is basically just
a toilet. You can't walk like more than 10 yards if there's not a toilet in sight.
Yeah, and interestingly, this is one of those times where someone is trying to mix two conflicting philosophies. They're like, okay, so I've heard we don't want to cut water. That's dangerous. So I'll make it so that I'm still drinking like a gallon day of, but relative to my normal water, it's less. And then it's like, well, do we need to dry out? That's constantly the question you have to ask yourself. And all you're really doing by drinking all that massive amounts of water is flushing out a bunch of electrolytes, which probably won't have a beneficial effect. So yeah, exactly right.
Okay. Right, last question. What are some of the factors you should take into account post-competition in regards to reverse dieting and training?
I would say that the period immediately post-contest is widely regarded, for good reason, as, not widely, but among veteran competitors, regarded as harder than the actual prep itself. The reason being is that the process of getting to minimal subcutaneous body fat creates what could be diagnosed as eating disorders in almost everybody. And that's kind of regardless of your history. This is a biological response to starvation. And the only thing that's keeping the person on track is they're handcuffed to getting on stage in a Speedo in front of a crowd of triple-digit people often. And it's an extremely important goal for them, and they're a competitor, and they're driven towards something they're passionate about. And it's very difficult not to rationalize binge eating and to give in to the biology when those handcuffs come off. And it's not uncommon, and this is something I experienced in 2007, to put on a massive amount of weight in a short period. So it's not only the psychological side of it, but you've also metabolically adapted to expend as few calories as you can, which is different for everybody. But to put it in perspective, I put it in kilos for you guys. You guys are British, you guys know. So I put on 48 pounds in 2 months, or I guess 22 kilos after my first contest season.
Damn.
I went from 178 pounds on stage to 226 only 2 months later. And when you think about the kind of caloric intake it would take to do that, it's pretty impressive,
So
yeah, I mean, and I wish I could say that was just an isolated story. I deal with that all the time with competitors I coach and trying to prevent that. So the first thing is that changing the mindset that you are crossing the finish line when you get on stage. There needs to be a plan in place weeks prior to getting on stage to how we're going to transition. There needs to be the same type of tracking and commitment and diligence for at least a period after the prep. For example, maybe eventually we want to get to the point where we're not weighing all our food and chasing down the grain of rice and licking our bowl clean for 5 minutes. But some of those things that are overly structured, kind of neurotic behaviors that develop during prep are there to give the person a sense of control. And if you remove them immediately, even if they also cause stress right after a show, then you can result in binging and a lack of structure. So I like to not only gradually increase calories post-show, but also gradually remove the neurotic behaviors that may or may not have developed during the contest prep. And also realizing the goal of a reverse diet or a post-contest transition is not to stay shredded. I think there's a misconception out there that, okay, I only add a gram of fat and a gram of carbs every week until, and it's, no, the first thing I do is I normally cut their cardio down to like a third of what it normally was, and I make an increase in their caloric intake by a pretty substantial amount, maybe 10 to 20% of where it's at, or sometimes as high as all the way to where they started the diet. And then let them settle there, and then slowly increase, and really work on the behavioral and emotional side of it as they come out of prep. That's the most important part. For me, the second season I did, the goal was simply not to get fat, and that was a successful. I did well, and then the goal of my third season was let's actually have a really, really good reverse diet, and I did that well as well. So I think. And even in that really good reverse diet, I still had maybe one blowout where I lost control. So I think any reverse diet plan needs to have in place the acknowledgement that you're going to fall off the rails. That's just kind of name of the game post-show. A lot of guys won't binge at all for a 30-something week prep, and then they'll have a really struggle with that on almost a weekly basis after their show. So it's basically acknowledging that you're human, and then having a plan that acknowledges that as well, so that you can mitigate the negative sides of that. Excellent.
Well, thanks for those answers, Eric. They've been great. Just wanted to let the guys know, in case they don't know, that you're actually coming over to the UK on the 19th and 20th of April, and you'll be doing 2 seminars on the same topic, evidence-based bodybuilding for the natural competitor. So could you tell us a little bit more about what the people can expect when they attend?
Yeah, so I'm going to get everybody into posing trunks to start, regardless of their condition, and then we're just going to put dream tan on each other and just pretty much hang out, No, but seriously,
could you imagine?
So yeah, I can imagine. That's why we're doing it. No. Yeah. So basically, what I've set up is a day where we go through the off season, through the competition season, and into that post-contest period, and we have evidence-based approaches from the start to the finish, an interactive style of a seminar, like a Q&A at the end of each topic, to really kind of give someone the theory and some anecdotes on how to do it to take either themselves or a client, because a lot of people interested in bodybuilding are also trainers or want to become trainers. I want to say maybe like 40% of my clients are trainers themselves. So how to go through that process, what you can expect, and kind of the blending of science and practice, and how some of the theories that we can tease out of the research can be implemented in a practical sense. With a big attention to the fact that we're dealing with people. I think a lot of kind of the topics that are covered by most people involved in this are just like, so what's the most optimal for optimization of hypertrophy and body fat loss, and without realizing that every single piece of information needs to be adapted to the individual and put in the context of a real world situation. So that's what we're going to be doing, of course, in posing trunks and dream tan. So.
Excellent. I'm going to hold you to that. Be like, Eric, you got your trunks?
Yeah, I'll just lift up my gut and be like, see, they're under there. Yeah.
Right, well, thanks for your time, Eric, and cheers as well, Ali, and we'll hopefully see you guys at the seminars.
Cool.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers, Aaron.